This is Talk Business and Politics with Roby Brock.
And welcome to the program. I'm Roby Brock. Election day draws very near. I'm here with two of the top experts in Arkansas that we work with all the time. We got Dr. Jay Barth, political science professor at Hendrix College, Robert Coon, Impact Management Group managing partner. We have been doing some polling. It's time to talk about what we think is going to happen on election night and what we're seeing kind of leading up to election day here too. So, Robert, I will begin with you. Early vote numbers in Arkansas, they seem a little higher than what we've seen in some midterm elections in the past, but should we read too much into that?
I think you could read too much into it. I think it's hard to see the trend, but I think you kind of have a trend coming where more people are choosing to early vote. It's becoming the norm. It's becoming the preferred way to do it. Early vote numbers are really high. Obviously, you're going to probably see some increase over the previous midterm in total turnout. And 52% of people early voted in 2016. In prior years, it had probably been
more than half. I'm not sure everybody's aware of that. That's a huge turnout for early voting.
In 14 and 12, it was 42, 43%. I think you're just seeing a natural progression of ease of doing it, familiarity with doing it. It does change the game for people running campaigns and for candidates tremendously, because your October surprise maybe needs to be your late September surprise now, because if everybody's already voted, what you do at the end of the campaign really isn't as impactful.
Yeah. I do think we are seeing nationally lots of enhanced interest in elections. 2014 was a particularly low turnout nationally. Arkansas was a little bit better because we did have competitive elections here. But I think we will see some increase. I think the other thing that we have to note that is driving some of the increases, we have competition in some of the lower level races, state legislative races, county races around the state, that many of which haven't been contested in years, or decades in some cases. And so that's also, I think, driving some stuff. If you drive some of the rural roads of this state, the number of sheriff signs or county judge signs really out of control, and those folks are going, they will vote for all the ballot, but they are there to
just
vote.
To put some statistics to that, you are seeing a lot more Democratic competition up in northwest Arkansas, which traditionally has not, but at the county level, as you mentioned, in terms of Republican competition, really starting to creep up more and own more of those county level seats, JPs, judges, sheriffs and whatnot. I think we've seen in 2011, Republicans had 11% of all the cumulative seats in Arkansas. They had 41% after the 2016 election, and there's more that filed this time around. So that is, I think, too, driving some of this growth.
But I think Benton and Washington County they've really been particularly high. Pulaski County's been pretty high as well. So it does seem to be happening in some of the more urban
and that's where a lot of those competitive local races are.
Yeah, and I have said too, and I pointed this out to a couple groups as well, is that in 2014 was a pretty epic midterm in Arkansas. I mean, we had an open governor seat, Mike Ross and Asa Hutchinson. You had the Tom Cotton, Mark Pryor Senate race, which was, I mean, the biggest one we've ever seen in Arkansas, $40 million spent between them, and then congressional races.
Several of which people thought were going to be incredibly close. They weren't close, as it turned out.
Yeah, 2010 was the Tea Party wave year in Arkansas, and you saw a lot of activity then, and that was also Blanche Lincoln, John Bozeman for the U.S. Senate. So for people thinking maybe this midterm might be super performing in terms of previous midterms in Arkansas, we've had some big ones the last two midterm elections. All right, let's talk about what races do we think will be called early on election night? Which ones do we think may go late into the night? Robert, I'll give you your choice of where you want to go with that.
Well, I think really all of the constitutional officers are be called pretty early. I think probably the one that gets called the latest is maybe Supreme Court. I think that one is a total toss-up at this stage, and it's going to take every box in every county potentially to find out who wins that one.
I tend to agree. I think those will probably be the earliest calls. It'll be interesting to see if any of the statewide offices kind of a gap develops. And in 2014, the Attorney General's race, for instance, was one where there was a gap between the top of the ticket and that Attorney General's race. It'll be interesting to see if there's one race that stands out a little.
I would think that if it's any of them, it would be either AG or Secretary of State.
I think probably
maybe Secretary of State, since it's an open seat.
I think probably Secretary of State. Susan Inman has been able to get on the air, and she does have a deep qualifications for the office.
She's doing more of the fundamentals. I don't think AG will be. I think that one gets called early.
Nonetheless, John Thurston and Leslie Rutledge have R's after their names as well.
Indeed.
And Leslie Rutledge has AG in front of her name, and John Thurston will have Commissioner of State Lands in front of his. So, I think the mayor's race, the Little Rock mayor's race, will be another one that will be a late call, because you're going to have to get all the boxes in to see how that one plays out. And I will remind everybody that there are mayor's races in a lot of other places. Jacksonville has one. Benton has one. Your partner, Terry Benham, running there. You want to make a prediction on that one? Hold tight on that. No, don't get that one on air.
Bentonville's
got a big one up there too, with 5 people in that race too. So that one's one to keep an eye on there.
I do think the ballot measures. I do think casinos will be very late, and I would really, warn folks, watching election returns that night. I think we're going to see some real regional patterns on the casino issue, both because of an urban-rural split, and we do see in rural Arkansas, especially those rural counties that are very heavily white, there's going to be, I think, opposition, kind of built-in opposition. If those come in early, it may look bad for casinos. When if other more heavily African-American or urban areas come in, the numbers may be very different. So I think watching where those come from on casinos is going to be important.
Too. Is there a partisan split on that one as well?
Yeah, Democrats are more inclined to support it, although Republican voters are kind of half and half. The biggest break on that's age. So that's I mean, that's really where that thing really moves one way or the other.
We need to take a quick commercial break. We're going to come back with more with Robert Coon and Jay Barth right after this. Welcome back to the program. I'm joined by Robert Coon of Impact Management Group, Hendrix College's Dr. Jay Barth. We are talking some politics here. All right, there's a couple of legislative races that I think are really interesting. We don't really have data on them, but I just think either through peculiarity or the fact that they could be litmus tests on a few things they're interesting to talk about. Let's begin with Michael John Gray, the Democrat, versus Craig Christensen, the Republican. This is a House race, but Michael John Gray is the chairman of the Democratic Party. He represents a district that leans Republican. It's a rural district in the 1st Congressional District, and we've seen a lot of Republican activity there. What are you watching for in that race, and what would be the significance of that race if he were to lose?
Well, one thing I'm watching, it's slightly more rural, very much more rural. It does have some significant African American population in it, so that does create a base of Democratic support there. It clearly has been a distraction for the party chair to have to pay attention to his own race. He's not been able to raise money and campaign for other candidates to the greatest degree possible. And if he has campaigned, he's been distracted from his own race, which is always troubling. It would be symbolically damaging, and obviously Michael John Gray, in an environment where there aren't that many Democrats, he is one of the most experienced kind of tacticians in the legislature as well on the Democratic side. So I think it, both in terms of politics and also then in terms of governance, could matter.
Would the GOP hoist his scalp up on the flagpole down at the RPA headquarters?
I would say that probably the reasons Jay articulated of why he's, has a competitive race, the distraction effect, I think, is probably part of the reason why he has one. I think the 1st Congressional District and the 4th in particular just shows so heavily swinging Republican in all the surveys that we've done. Everybody always thinks the 3rd District Republican. We've talked about how those things have changed a little bit. The 1st and 4th are really where you see a lot of Republican intensity, and you see independents more aligning themselves with Republicans. So obviously it's probably a difficult environment for him. I haven't followed the race closely enough. I would assume that, there's the potential as being party chair. They're probably tying you to party platform things that maybe make you feel uncomfortable at home. I don't know that, but I think that's a dicey place to be a Democrat. You've seen a lot of Democrats kind of lose footing in that area in particular.
Well, that's one we'll keep our eye on. Another one that I think we'll keep an eye on, and this one's one that I think symbolically would mean a lot to the Democrats if they won, is the Charlie Collins versus Denise Garner race up in Fayetteville. Charlie Collins, obviously, the supporter of the guns on college campuses, and that has riled up a lot of Democrats against him. What do you think might happen in that race?
Well, I mean, that's kind of the opposite of what we just talked about. I mean, the 3rd District is, does have a kind of a trend going where it is becoming a little bit more blue than it has been in the past. Independent voters are not necessarily automatically going to align with Republicans. I mean, I think that is really a competitive race. I think they're both candidates are doing all the fundamentals that it takes to win. I think turnout plays into that. I think there's obviously a state Senate district on top of that that's been in the news recently. I think that plays into that as well. That could be one of those, nail biters. I think it's been really competitive in the past on the numbers.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that people miss about that race is that, especially 4 years ago, it was a very close race when Collins first, or was it 6 years ago?
6 years ago when he first got in.
It was a very close contest that year, so it's a closely contested district anyway. But she seems to have a combination of plenty of money to do the fundamentals, but then she does have some grassroots support that is pretty potent. I think Democrats are going to be thoroughly disappointed if they don't win that race because Collins is symbolic of some policies, but I think there's just been a lot of kind of blood, sweat, and tears put in that race on the Democratic side.
All right, to give you each a chance to pick one other race that you might want to keep your eye on election night, just one that we haven't talked out there. Could be an issue race, could be a legislative race, could be anything that we hadn't discussed. What's one race that you've got an eye on that you think people ought to just keep an eye on this one?
I would say maybe the Carolyn Brown, Jonathan Crossley race. I think that's a seat that's been Republican for a little while. I think that you've got an energetic Democrat there. I don't know. I'm interested to see how the congressional race lays on top of that. That comes into what is Clark Tucker doing with turnout in that district. That's an interesting one for me. I think that Crossley is obviously out there doing things. Obviously, Representative Brown is too. He's got kind of the teacher angle. I don't know. I think that one is one that I'm at least going to be watching.
That was top of my list. That's all right. Let's go. But another one I'm watching, which is not a determinant of who wins or loses. I'm going to be watching Josh Mahoney's vote in the 3rd district because if there is movement in the 3rd district towards the Democrats, Steve Womack is the establishment Republican in the Arkansas delegation, and if that's a district that's been horrific for Democrats historically. And if Josh Mahoney, gets into high 30s, low 40s, that would say 3rd district is kind of where the future is.
He could potentially overperform what we've seen the floor in the 3rd district be for a Democrat.
So that's something I'm watching, which is not a winner or loser, but I think could tell a lot about the future of the state.
I agree with that.
Yeah, let's turn our attention to nationally here because what we have seen, the Trump numbers in Arkansas from our polling have been pretty volatile. He's been low, he's been high. He moves around more than any presidential person I've ever seen in our polling. They're usually normally pretty solid there, but it hasn't necessarily tied to Arkansas candidates so much, even though we saw Trump bounce around a lot. Didn't really move French Hill's numbers significantly. Didn't really move Governor Hutchinson's numbers significantly either. What are we watching for nationally in terms of, do you think that Trump doing what he's doing on the campaign trail here these last few days, does it affect the outcome of the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate?
I think nationally it does have some impact. I do think that the tactic that the Trump operation has taken in the stretch run may be helpful somewhat in bringing back more exurban and rural Trump voters, getting them activated and into the electorate. I think it is pretty toxic in the suburbs. And so I think it probably means that it helps in some of those Senate states, the states in the country where there are Senate races, which tend to skew not just Republican, but also Trump Republican, and then really hurts in the suburbs. May help a little bit in holding down some of the Democratic gains on the House side in some of those districts that went for President Obama, but then came back and went for President Trump.
Yeah, I think the volatility in his numbers are really the reason why you don't see him being an issue in a lot of races. I think, French Hill and Clark Tucker, one month it might be great for French Hill to say, I'm standing here with Trump, and the next month it might be not good to say I'm standing here with Trump, and the vice versa for Clark. Day to day, I don't want to tag him as being with Trump because it might help him this month or it might hurt him. I just don't, you don't know what the impact's going to be. Yeah. Anybody at this stage on the national level, that's having him come in and tying themselves to him is taking the gamble that it's a net plus, and I think your analysis is probably pretty right on who it's a net plus with. At the House level, you don't get to smooth out those numbers. You have strong pockets of suburban voters that may not think that that's the right direction. So I think I agree that, you know, on the House side, it probably has a more significant impact.
So
on
what
the
do you
Senate.
think happens, predictions here? Do the Democrats take back the House, Republicans gain in the Senate, or do you see some other scenario?
I definitely think that Republicans will gain in the Senate. I think Democrats have a pretty decent shot at taking back the House.
Jay?
I say one vote shift, and I don't know in what direction in the Senate. And then I think that Democrats take the House. You know, the question is it by a few seats, or is it by 20 or 25 seats? And I think there are going to be a crazy number of just very close House. We're going to be up late or early into Wednesday watching the national numbers.
It is, but we might not be up late watching some of the Arkansas numbers, so we'll see. But there are some. All right. Robert Coon, Jay Barth, as always, thank you so much for your analysis, and thank you so much for everything you've done leading up to Election Day here. We've had a great run, and it's been some good information, so thank you much.
Thank you. Great. Thanks.
All right, we're back with more right after this.